Welcome back to the 99, where we're focused on brewing a better competitive commander. I'm your host, Patrick Marlette, and this is the best Rakdos list I have ever built or played. Now that's not me tooting my own flute. This list practically made itself. It's all accredited to the two partners manning the helm. You have the greatest enabler in red, partner paired with the best draw engine in the command zone, period. Rograkh, son of Rograkh, 0 CMC, 0/1 body, legendary creature, first strike, menace, trample, partner. None of that matters. It gives you access to red, Mox Amber, Calling the Weak, Infernal Plunge. Need I name any more cards that this enables, as well as Tevesh, Spot, Doom of Fools. For 4 generic and 1 black, 4 loyalty counters on arrival, +2, create 2 0/1 black thrall creature tokens, +1, you may sacrifice another creature or planeswalker. If you do, draw 2 cards, then draw another card if the sacrifice permanent was a commander. And it's -10, well, it is definitely worth writing home about. Gain control of all commanders, put all commanders from the command zone onto the battlefield under your control. That also means Tevesh if you did -10 when there were 10 loyalty counters on Tevesh. Your goal for Rograkh and Tevesh is simple. You want to cast either Peer into the Abyss or Nauseam. And I said Peer there first because it is the priority. And if none of those options present themselves, well, your new priority is casting Tevesh on turn 1 or 2, the latest. You're only going to keep hands that allow you to cast Tevesh on turn 1 or 2. Now, with all this turbo talk around town, I had to throw my head in the ring, and I honestly think that this Rakdos Storm list takes the cake. It is easily the most degenerate list I've ever built. Now, before we jump into the deck tech today, I want you all to know that if you enjoy the programming here on the 99, the best way to help support it is with your pledge over at Patreon, and there's a link in the description with all of the benefits outlined there. However, if that's not your bag of chips, well then guess what? You can help support the channel indirectly by buying this deck and or the singles from it via the link in the description over at TCG Player. It costs you nothing extra, however, it does go a long way to help support the channel, so I thank you for your help on that. And finally, this is the last week we'll be discussing this monthly topic, but what color in Commander do you feel needs the most improvement and why? And of course, at the end of this video, we'll be hearing from one of our Brew Crew members on this very topic. However, I'd love to know your thoughts on this topic as well. Feel free to leave them in the comments section down below. Now, I've read off our legendary pairing here. They're very good with one another. Red has access to all of the goods that you want these days. It has your Underworld Breach, and that's really all you need. And if you're outside of blue, it has a lot of good countermeasures for said blue decks that you'll be facing. Of course, if you're playing at the upper crust, against all the blue farms of the world, well then this is going to give you all the tools you need to combat them. And I'll encourage you to hang tight for the upcoming Brew Wars, where I pit this against some other pretty top tier lists just to see how it weighs against them. And it was a very, very fun showing, as well as one call time list I should mention, but hang tight for that. It's a very, very fun set of games. At any rate, the core cards for this list are the ones I'm going to go over first, and I'm going to start with one other creature, the only other creature that's featured in this list, and that creature is Rograkh the Foul-Blooded. Now, Raza should be on the screen now, but it's 5 generic and triple black for a legendary creature demon, 8/8 body, flying, trample, pay 2 life, sacrifice another creature, search your library for a card, and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. Now, we're going to go over win cons and play lines after this segment of the video, but I want you to know that Rograkh is only going to be prioritized if you have Tevesh down and you have 2 creatures, and that is after you get Tevesh out of your list. If you have 2 creatures on the field, you're able to cast Peer into the Abyss or Nauseam at that same time, provided you have 1 black mana on top of this. Now, how do we cheat Rograkh out? This is modeled similarly to my Scramble list with Sire of Insanity. If you haven't watched my Rograkh and Tymna list, the Mardu list that cheats out Sire of Insanity on turn 1 or 2, as early as you can land it, this is conceptually a different take on that same strategy. However, it's intended to win on the spot instead of through attrition. So if you're more interested in turboing out a win, if you're more interested in playing proactively and pushing a win early, then this is definitely the list I'll encourage you to build. However, the Sire list is still a great time if that's of interest to you, just making your friends hate you. However, the next 2 core cards, and there's really only 3 we're going to discuss. Rograkh is one of them. Again, the only creature in the list, in Divergent Transformations. Now, For 6 generic and 1 red, I promise it's worth it. Instant Speed, Undaunted. The spell costs 1 less to cast for each opponent you have. So it's a grand total of 4 CMC, provided you have 3 opponents still at this point. And by the time you're playing this, it should be between turn 2 and 4, right? If you're going this route. But this is going to grab Rograkh for you and potentially something for your opponent. Exile 2 target creatures. For each card, for each of those creatures, its controller reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she reveals a creature card, puts that card onto the battlefield, then shuffles the rest into their library. Now, the divergent line of play. You can do this on your main phase, and I wouldn't encourage it unless your opponents are tapped out and you have the okay, you have the go-ahead, you've got some counter interaction in your hand, and you know that when you pop Divergent Transformations, let's just say that I'm getting rid of that opposition agent, right? And then I'm going to get rid of one of my Thrall. And I have Rograkh and Thrall, the extra Thrall that Tevesh makes, still in the battlefield. Again, you want 2 creatures after you've done this. And I'll explain why shortly. But you'll get rid of whatever hate bear that was bothering you on the field. You'll get rid of that. It could be, it doesn't have to be opposition agent. It can honestly just be an opposing Crom or any opposing commander or creature that is giving your opponents value. And then one of your Thrall. So long as you do that at instant speed, you're also able to pop off, provided you go for Ad Nauseam while you're doing the line of play we'll discuss shortly. But Divergent Transformation, it's very important to this list. We're only using 2 effects that transmogrify or scramble in the list. And speaking of scramble, the other one is Reality Scramble. And it technically has 2 targets in this list. And I'll go over the use cases of Reality Scramble a little bit later as well. However, it is a main part of our list and part of the core play line. So for 2 generic and double red, Reality Scramble at sorcery speed, put target permanent you own at the bottom of your library. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a card that shares a card type with that permanent. Sounds very familiar, right? Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. What's great is that you can also recast this from your graveyard for its retrace cost, which is the same cost, but also involves discarding a land card. You don't exile this after the fact. You can continually do this if you happen to fail or succeed and you just want to do it again. Again, very similar to the Rograkh and Timna list, and if you haven't seen that, I'll encourage you to check that out. But Reality Scramble is one of the best polymorphs in the game of Magic, because it hits any permanent. Now, mind you, this does not hit opposing permanents, so this can't be used as a form of removal if push comes to shove. It only hits target permanents you own. However, there are 2 targets, one being Rograkh and the other being Tevesh, right? So, and I'll go over that now. It's important to note that when you're going for Underworld Breach lines of play, more oftentimes than not, it's best if you have a tutor in your graveyard so that you can accelerate your game plan or get the ball rolling, provided you don't have many cards in your grave and or you're missing the LED or you're missing the, for a blue list, it would be Brain Freeze. For this list, it's going to be Grinding Station. So if you have a tutor, but it's a top deck tutor, you can Reality Scramble Tevesh to bring Tevesh right back up from the bottom of your library, back onto the battlefield. Go ahead and cast your Imperial Seal or whatever it is that's lying in your graveyard, your Vampiric Tutor, and use Tevesh's ability to sacrifice one of your creatures to draw 2 cards. If it happens to be Rograkh, well, it's overkill. You've drawn 3 cards to include the likely Grinding Station. And the same exact playline works with Rograkh to roll over into Rograkh. And again, provided you have 2 creatures, you're able to pop off with either Ad Nauseam and Peer into the Abyss. Your only requisite, again, is the 4 mana setup, as well as 1 black mana after the fact, and 2 creatures. So, should that board state present itself to you, you'll go ahead and Reality Scramble Rograkh into Rograkh. And with those 2 creatures, likely Thrall at this point, you're going to go ahead and sacrifice 1 for Burnt Offering. Then you'll sacrifice the other for either Peer into the Abyss or Ad Nauseam. With Burnt Offering in hand at 1 black at instant speed, as an additional cost to cast the spell Sacrifice a Creature, that creature will be Rograkh at this point. Add X mana in any combination of black and or red, where X is the sacrifice creature's converted mana cost, while Rograkh happens to be 8, and Peer into the Abyss happens to be 7. So we'll have excess mana after the fact, and it's even easier to make this happen with Ad Nauseam. Now this all depends on two things. Are you doing this off turn with Divergent Transformation? Well, if you are, you're obviously going to want to go for Ad Nauseam so that you can have the cards during your turn. Or if you happen to have an Emergent Zone on the board, you can win on the spot. Now, I'm not going to go over all the play lines to make that work, but you do need an additional mana and Emergent Zone to pop off with the same combo we'll be illustrating shortly. You'll go ahead and go for Peer into the Abyss 9 times out of 10. Unless there's a Hull Breacher on the field and or you're anticipating a Hull Breacher cast, I highly encourage you go for Peer into the Abyss. It is the better draw card here. Ad Nauseam is very easy to get off and still succeed with. However, you will see more cards with Peer into the Abyss. That's just the nature of the card. But what's beautiful about this list is that Tevesh usually detracts all of the hate from attackers away from you. So your life total generally hovers where it's at after a fetch land and a shock land, right? So your life total is going to be good for the Ad Naus. It's equally viable. So again, unless you're expecting a Hull Breacher or a Notion Thief or something that's going to stop your draw from Peer, then go for Peer into the Abyss. Now, the thing is, after you've done Peer into the Abyss and after you've done Ad Nauseam, this is where the game opens up for you. Just like any other list that incorporates those two draw engines, and Ad Naus isn't technically draw, but you get what I'm saying. Any list that operates with those two cards or Necropotence, and we can talk about Necropotence a little bit later, you're going to want to do a handful of things to get the ball rolling on your strategy, and of course, I'll walk you through all the play lines now. If you're new to resolving Ad Nauseam or Peer into the Abyss and don't know how to operate with such a large hand of cards, it's very simple. Just remember this mnemonic: Raw. Removal, acceleration, win. Provided there are any stacks, pieces, or hate bears, anything bogging down your strategy from succeeding, and I mean Trini Spheres, Dampening Spheres, go ahead and use your removal first before attempting to storm off. This may involve using a handful of cards in our next category, however, removal always comes first. Afterwards, you're going to use all of your fast mana, your mana positive rocks, your rituals. Get your mana forward first so that you can begin your turn with as many resources as you have at your disposal. After you've accomplished that, you're going to go ahead and attempt the win. And this will vary between deck list to deck list. However, in Rakdos, the play lines have been solidified to 3 separate win cons. Or at least it's been narrowed down to 3 separate win conditions in my Rograkh and Tevesh list. This is to narrow down on any sort of dead draw you might have and up the amount of interaction you're allowed to run in this list. The first win condition you're going to work your way towards is Underworld Breach paired with Grinding Station and any 0 CMC mana rock you may have on the field. In this instance, let's just say we have Mana Crypt. Underworld Breach at 1 generic, 1 red enchantment. Each non-land card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's converted mana cost, plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. At the beginning of your end step, sacrifice Underworld Breach. When paired with Grinding Station at 2 CMC, artifact, sacrifice an artifact by tapping this artifact. Target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, and when an artifact comes into play, you may untap Grinding Station. We can go ahead and tap our Mana Crypt for 2 generic mana and sacrifice it to Grinding Station, milling 3 cards from our library. It just so happens that the escape cost for Mana Crypt is 0 CMC plus exile 3, and with Grinding Station, we've milled effectively the 3 cards we need to exile. I'll encourage that you remove lands from your graveyard instead of utilities that could be utilized with Underworld Breach, but at a certain point you're going to have to start removing certain other effects from your deck. Do keep tutors and countermeasures, provided your opponents may have answers for your breach line. You'll continue casting Mana Crypt from your graveyard, making 2 generic mana, and sacking it to Grinding Station, netting 2 generic each time. That'll allow you to potentially filter this into an Arcane Signet or Felwar Stone. You can also do this with a Mox Amber, Mox Opal. You get the idea. You're going mana positive while searching for one of 2 answers. And before I get to those win cons, I do want to take a moment to look over Lion's Eye Diamond. Lion's Eye Diamond here is predominantly for the discard and secondarily for mana fixing. And we'll get into why you might want to generate blue mana from this card in just a second. So while we continue that Grinding Station loop, we hit Ether Flux Reservoir. And just like all good Storm lists before it, you know what the fishbowl does, but I'll read it off for you anyways. For 4 generic artifacts, whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. Pay 50 life, Ether Flux Reservoir deals 50 damage to target creature or player. That is any target now. Now I know what you're thinking. Pat, don't you run Praetor's Grasp? Can't you just steal an opposing Thassa's Oracle or Jace or Laboratory Maniac? And yes, while the scenarios of not seeing a blue list and not seeing Thassa's Oracle are slim in a competitive setting, just in case you don't, this redundancy is absolutely necessary. And what happens if your Praetor's Grasp happens to be exiled? You do still need solutions, and this is one of 3 for the deck. And I've just mentioned that the second win con for this list is Praetor's Grasp. Now, what you'll do with this after you've milled yourself is steal an opposing Thassa's Oracle, or Jace Wielder of Mysteries, and or Laboratory Maniac, and I'm going to assume we all know what these cards do. Much like Ad Nauseam and Peer into the Abyss, they let you win the game. Praetor's Grasp is a backup to Flux Reservoir. I generally save Praetor's Grasp to steal opposing Underworld breaches, provided I fail on my own breach line. However, keep this in your back pocket in case you need to pop off with a solution that isn't Flux Reservoir, or this next one we'll be discussing. After you've peered into the Abyss or Adnaused, you can alternatively storm in a different way, utilizing Reiterate to destroy the board. Reiterate for 1 generic and double black, instant speed, buyback 3, copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Not only is this good for stealing opposing counters, for stealing opposing Ad Nauseams, for stealing opposing Peer into the Abyss, Reiterate also happens to be a finisher for the list. You have that fat stack of cards in your hand, you've gone through all the raw material, the removal, the acceleration, and now you're ready to win. Well, it just turns out you have 14 mana to spend. Now, how can you spend this efficiently to win with Reiterate, I hear you ask? Well, remember that Rograkh we sacrificed to Burnt Offering? Well, we also run Reanimate in this deck. If you play Reanimate on your Rograkh, you're able to recast Burnt Offering with either Underworld Breach or Yawgmoth's Will, which we can talk about in just a second, to pop off with a victory. You'll need 6 mana up front to start this combo, and provided you're able to generate 7 or more mana, you'll be able to win the game. Now, this could either mean Burnt Offering, which we know nets us 8 mana with Rograkh, and or Jeska's Will, provided you've wheeled and someone's left with 7 cards in hand and nothing to do with it. To generate infinite mana, all you need do is cast Reiterate, copying said Jeska's Will and or Burnt Offering, netting 7 or more mana from this. With the buyback cost paid for Reiterate with Jeska's Will or Burnt Offering on the stack, go ahead and recast it. Continue casting Reiterate until you've net infinite mana. With Burnt Offering, this could be black or red, but for this list, you just need red mana. What's interesting to note is that with Jeska's Will, if you still happen to have Rograkh or Tevesh on the board, you're able to exile the remainder of your library to have access to every single card in your list. Once you've established infinite mana with Reiterate in hand, go ahead and cast Lightning Bolt, targeting your own Rograkh, why not? With that on the stack before it ever resolves, go ahead and cast Reiterate with its buyback, copying Lightning Bolt. Continue to copy Lightning Bolt to destroy the board. After a large Ad Nauseam or Peer into the Abyss, if it is on your turn, I generally try to manually assemble the Reiterate line of play first and use Underworld Breach as a backup. Provided I fail doing the Reiterate line of play, I can very easily assemble the same win with Reiterate by casting Underworld Breach and then manipulating all of the previous ramp and fast mana that I have in my graveyard. And at this point, it would be good to go ahead and crack that Lion's Eye Diamond. Now, there is one more way to storm off with this list that doesn't incorporate Reiterate and or Underworld Breach. Lastly, we have Yawgmoth's Will. Remember when Storm was honest and kept the player in check for doing the deed? You can still manually assemble both the Reiterate and Flux line of play by utilizing Yawgmoth's Will to recast all of the necessary rituals and fast mana from your grave to raise your Storm or mana count for either combo. If for some reason, after you've Adnaused or peered into the Abyss and you lack Underworld Breach and or a necessary tutor to acquire Underworld Breach, and or you don't have your Praetor's Grasp to simply steal an opposing Underworld Breach, you can manually storm the old-fashioned way. Just remember that same mnemonic as before. Raw. Removal first. Remove any threats. Then acceleration. Put all your mana forward. Get everything on board so that you have access to all of the resources in your hand. Then attempt the win. And I mean, crack that Lotus Petal. Use every ritual before you cast Yawgmoth's Will, because after that, it all gets exiled. Now, I'll actually encourage you push for the Reiterate line of play if you have that accessible before you attempt doing Flux Reservoir. And in rare instances will you need to rely on Yawgmoth's Will, but keep it in your back pocket. It is still one of the king of Storm, okay? It is still a fantastic Storm card. Now, there are a few odds and ends I want to get to, and I assure you, they may seem like oddities for the list, but they're perfect for the deck. But before I go over that, I want you all to know that with Rograkh, when we set up that win line with Reality Scramble or Divergent Transformation, if that's the route we go, if that's just how the game shakes out, because you can very easily cast Adnals on turn 1 with the mana you make, if you do that, if you happen to have more creatures than the 2 necessary, go ahead and use that third creature to grab your Deflecting Swat, or grab any form of Stax interaction. It's very important that you make these draw effects go off. You want to just get the big hand. And even if you have the Underworld Breach in hand and all you need is a grinding station, I still recommend you draw all those cards. This list is meant to draw all the cards. You want every single resource at your disposal to make sure nothing goes wrong. Because they let you resolve your Divergent Transformation or they let you resolve your Reality Scramble, that doesn't mean a thing. You still want to get as many resources available to do the thing. Even if it feels obnoxious for your opponents to watch you just go through your deck every single time they game with you, that's how this deck is meant to operate. Okay, we are lacking blue. We are lacking Stax interaction with countermeasures. So we do need everything to go to our advantage. Now with that, Claim the Firstborn. This is the first odds and ends I want to talk about. For 1 red, sorcery speed, gain control of target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less until the end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until the end of turn. Now, okay, well, I can steal, let me think. I can steal Tymna, I can steal Thrasios, Najeela, Bergi. I can steal so many 3CMC commanders, but what else is there? Let me see. I can take your Hull Breacher, right? I can start drawing again with my Tevesh. I can take your Opposition Agent. I can start tutoring again with my list. What else can I do with Claim the Firstborn? Oh my god, wait! Tevesh is a sack outlet. I can eat your Tymna. I'm going to eat all your commanders, and when I eat your commander, I draw an additional card. That's why Claim the Firstborn is here. It's not just to be cute. It's not to steal your thing and attack you with it, although I can. Thank you, Tymna, for letting me draw. Now I'll eat you. Claim the Firstborn is removal. No matter how you look at it, this deck is oriented at getting Tevesh down on turn 1 or 2. So when you cast Claim the Firstborn, eat an opposing creature. Don't just eat your Thrall. Don't just eat Rograkh unless you have to. Rograkh is predominantly there for the draw, but go ahead and eat your opponent's stuff first. And that's what Claim the Firstborn lets you do. And how about those larger creatures, those bigger threats that loom in cEDH? Well, we've got Wrangle for you. For 1 generic and 1 red, sorcery speed, gain control of target creature with power 4 or less until the end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until the end of turn. Well, there's not a thing that Wrangle doesn't hit in a cEDH setting that I'm concerned with, right? An opposing Crom is the biggest threat to Tevesh because it has haste and flying. It drops and hits me for 4? Oh, Wrangle says I get to eat your Crom. That's what Wrangle does. Also, Wrangle hits pretty much anything else that's going to be a threat on the board so far as hate bears are concerned. You know, historically, 2/2s, but now they come in all shapes and sizes and none of them have 4 or more power. Linvala, Keeper of Silence, she's like a 4/4, right? 4/3? Doesn't even matter. We're not trying to wrangle her anyways. However, we can wrangle anything into our board state and eat it. Draw cards. I love drawing cards. There's been no partner and or legendary that draws cards as well as Tevesh. Period. You can fight me on that, but Tevesh has been absurd value for me in this list, and just let alone the format as a whole. Very heavily slept on when you're looking at a 5 CMC commander, but he does absurd things. Now the next odd and end I want to talk about is Scheming Symmetry. So for 1 black, sorcery speed, choose 2 target players. Each of them searches their library for a card, then shuffles their library and puts that card on top. Well, if I happen to claim the Firstborn, your opposition agent, then go for Scheming Symmetry, or if I just cast Scheming Symmetry for 1 black, I can eat a Thrall and get the solution I need immediately. You have draw on command. It's not like having Crom where you have to wait for someone to cast a spell. It's not like having Tymna where you're forcibly having to make attacks that may or may not be good for you. And sometimes, especially now, with creature-based strategies making a resurgence, Tymna doesn't have targets. So you might not even draw with her. Tevesh, I just have to eat things, and I draw whatever I Scheming Symmetry. For Tevesh, in particular, Scheming Symmetry is a must. If you are looking for more tutors to get the job done, Scheming Symmetry is a must. In much the same way you would utilize a Wishclaw Talisman for your list, I'm giving you an artifact that tutors. you're trying to win right then and there. And I don't suggest you cast Scheming Symmetry unless, one, you need a solution on the spot. You need to remove something now, and or two, you're attempting a win. Scheming Symmetry is perfect in this list. I highly recommend you use it if you use a Rograkh and Tevesh list. Now, the next card I want to talk about is, it's what you consider a flex spot in this list. It's what you consider a flexible card, and that is Wheel of Misfortune. For 2 generic and 1 red, sorcery speed. I hate the wording of this card. Each player secretly chooses a number 0 or greater, then all players reveal those numbers simultaneously and determine the highest and lowest numbers revealed this way. Wheel of Misfortune deals damage equal to the highest number to each player who chose that number. Each player who didn't choose the lowest number discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. It's a very complicated Wheel of Fortune. You only cast this turn 1 or 2. It's rare that you're going to want to... Tevesh draws. Tevesh what? He draws like no other commander. Wheels in general, and there's a misconception with how wheels should function in a list. You don't run wheels, or you don't play them. You certainly don't play them unless they're functionally benefiting you, right? You have a list that runs Hull Breacher or something like that. And in those lists, Wheel of Misfortune is a stupid choice anyways. And or your list is very proactive. It accomplishes a task very quickly, and that is just putting mana down, and then refills your hand with cards that draw 7. So Wheel of Misfortune is a redundancy for the list for our Wheel of Fortune. And very often, you'll be able to Wheel of Fortune on turn 1 or 2. In much the same way Wheel of Fortune operates for this list, you'll manipulate Wheel of Misfortune. Neither of these wheels I'll encourage you to use mid to late game. There is no reason you should be giving your opponents advantage like this, unless first Tevesh has been knocked out 7 times and you're not able to recast Tevesh, right? You're not able to get value off of your Tevesh. Then, if your hand is hurting that bad, you can use Wheel of Misfortune and or Wheel of Fortune. But it's very rare you want to wheel for your opponents. It's very, very rare. At least that's how I manipulate them. There are certain lists that operate off wheels as win cons, you know, dropping the Notion Thief and then doing the Wheel of Fortune, whatever. Again, Wheel of Misfortune does not operate that way, though, because people just say 0. So unless you're into giving your opponent advantage, don't use Wheel of Misfortune outside of turn 1 or 2. It's usually just good rummage bait. If I'm being honest with you, it's something you're going to exile with Chrome Mox. That's why you run Wheel of Misfortune. It's definitely a flex spot. However, it's necessary for the list because committing to casting this on turn 1 is very, very, very simple. It's very easy to Infernal Plunge my Rograkh into Wheel of Misfortune after I've dropped a Mox Amber that I've floated mana off of and a Mana Crypt, which I could have arguably just casted Wheel of Misfortune that way, but you get what I'm saying. Don't do it unless you're doing something more after the fact, which proactive lists do. The next card I want to talk about is Imps Mischief. I love this card. For 1 generic and 1 black, it's gone up in price, by the way. These are reaching like $20 now. For instant speed spell, change the target of target spell with a single target. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. We're in Rakdos. Can you tell? We're in Rakdos. You don't have stacks interaction like blue does. We need every single redirect we can get, because you know why? Redirects function as counterspells. Redirects functionally give us our opponents Peer into the Abyss. Redirects allow us to set up the board state that's best for us. You're going to do damage to what now? Your Abraid's going to target that opposition agent instead. And now I can tutor on my turn. It's going to target the whatever instead. Redirects are crucial for lists that are outside of blue. And I encourage you to use every single one you can get your hand on. I mean, Ricochet Trap, if your commander is 4 power or greater, Bolt Bend, you're going to use Deflecting Swat, obviously, and you're going to use Imps Mischief, because you could take the damage. It's totally worth it. If you're wondering why it's in the list, it's because I don't have counters, and I want more ways to interact on the stack. It's a shame that that's limited to 1 color, but it's not exclusive. You get redirects, and Imps Mischief is one of them. And if you're wondering why it's $18 or $20 right now, it's because other colors need it. Other colors want to interact too. Next card I want to talk about, it seems like an oddity. Village Rites. For 1 black, I talked about this one when it came out in M21. Both arts are great, but we're going to be looking at the Kaldheim art because this art is just outstanding. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature. Draw 2 cards. In the instances where you begin the Underworld Breach line of play, and Reality Scramble is costly, we did talk about Reality Scrambling our Tevesh to get draw on the board. If you don't have the mana to do something as mana intensive as Reality Scrambling Tevesh into Tevesh, you can simply use Village Rites to get that top deck tutor that you've manipulated, right? You've done your Imp Seal, you've done your Vampiric Tutor, you need to get the next card. It's Grinding Station, likely, right? If you're going for Underworld Breach, then you can use Village Rites to sack one of your Thrall, to sack Rograkh, recast Rograkh for 4 CMC or 2 CMC, whatever he is now, Village Rites. Go ahead and grab the card. And this is only if Tevesh has been utilized prior. And I highly recommend that when you put Tevesh down, use Tevesh's loyalty abilities as the last thing you do on a turn. You know, unless you're expecting someone to Chain of Vapor Tevesh or something crazy like that to bounce Tevesh, then, you know, push Tevesh's, the priority on Tevesh's loyalty counters more so. But I usually save that last so that I can utilize that as part of my action per turn, right? Because you don't know until you've top decked what you can effectively do on your turn. I try to reserve the Planeswalker abilities for last. However, if you've utilized Tevesh on this turn, whatever turn this is, combo turn if you have Underworld Breach down, manipulate Village Rites for that draw. It's very good draw utility for the list. And if you happen to be making bad blocks, right, like you will do with Tevesh and Rograkh, because people are going to be swinging at you, you can go ahead and block with the Thrall and sacrifice the Thrall to get something out of it. And draw 2 at instant speed is pretty damn good. For putting a 0-1 Thrall in front of a Najeela, that's pretty damn good in my book. So, Village Rites. Do you need more draw? Always. Always. Especially if your list is just putting down mana and, you know, making mana with rituals, you need to fill up that hand quick because it dwindles. Particularly when you don't have Tevesh on the field. So Village Rites is fantastic for the list. I highly encourage you use it. And the last odds and end before I just do some general conversation about our commanders and how you should be playing this list is Springleaf Drum. It's an odd form of ramp, but it's an important form of ramp. So for 1 generic artifact, tap an untapped creature you control, add 1 mana of any color. Now, it does not matter if that creature is summoning sick. None of that matters. Provided you have Springleaf Drum, you have 1 mana of any color. Are you trying to go for the Thassa's Oracle line of play, and you don't have access to your Lion's Eye Diamond, but you've got a Lotus Petal and this? Well, that's double blue, right? This is great color fixing for those instances, but honestly, a turn 1 Springleaf Drum into Rograkh into a Mana Vault is pretty damn good too, because on my next turn, even if I don't have another land, I have Tevesh. Springleaf Drum is better than the alternative, which would be Paradise Mantle. Paradise Mantle is 0 to cast, but 1 to equip, and we are sacrificing our creatures constantly in this list, and we're going to talk about how you want to play this list while going for the play lines that win the game. But Springleaf Drum is arguably one of the better pieces of ramp for the deck once you've laid it down. It also happens to help you hit the threshold on your Mox Opal. It also happens to be an additional artifact that you can sacrifice with Grinding Station, provided you need to fuel your Underworld Breach. For every reason listed, it is an essential for the list. And if you're looking to build this deck, I highly encourage you incorporate Springleaf Drum. Now, closing thoughts on the deck. Rograkh is solely there as an object of sacrifice. You are going to manipulate Rograkh to put Tevesh down early. If that means calling the weak into a Soul Ring on turn 1 into Tevesh, well, that's what you do. And for 2 CMC, I can draw 3 on the next turn. For 4 CMC, I can draw 3. Is that Harmonize? Once Rograkh reaches 6 CMC, it's advisable to continue putting him in the command zone unless you know you can attempt an Underworld Breach line of play soon, at which point it's safe to put Rograkh in your graveyard. Now, why would you ever put your commander in your graveyard? Well, Rograkh is breach fodder at this point. If Rograkh costs anything more than 6 CMC to cast, unless the game has really hit a standstill and it's just a complete slog, right? You've gone beyond turn 5, turn 6, turn 7, then Rograkh in the grave is just as good as in the command zone, because once you've established Underworld Breach, you can either use Rograkh as an exile target for the escape, right? It's just another thing to exile with your fetch lands, and or Rograkh is a 0 CMC body again to cast from the graveyard and draw into a top deck tutor, or it's just 0 CMC to cast and use a Culling the Weak on. Any one of the rituals that I'll encourage you to look over the list over all the cards that Rograkh enables. And if you don't know, I do a better job, I think, breaking it down with my Rograkh and Tymna list. Again, all the core ideas behind why Rograkh is valuable for a list are in that video and in that primer. You'll notice that there is no written primer for this. So this video is all the advice I'm going to offer you on this list. However, Rograkh, very good early game, late game. Put him in the command zone, put him in the graveyard. He's equally good anywhere. He's more than just a 0/1 body. He is the enabler that powers this list, that pushes it forward and faster than any other deck. Because no other deck is going to operate as quickly as having something on turn 1 that enables you to Infernal Plunge, to Culling the Weak, the Mox Amber, all of the above. Nothing gives you that kind of potential outside of Rograkh. And of course, the red is great for Underworld Breach. Now, Tevesh, regarding Tevesh, Svat. I generally play, and I don't go below hands of 6 because I know that if the hand that has presented itself to me, if it doesn't have Nauseam or it doesn't have Peer into the Abyss, that's totally okay. Because having a turn 1 Tevesh should be the main objective of this list. Nothing grinds better than Tevesh. Nothing pushes a win faster than Tevesh. And if you have a turn 1 Tevesh and no one is able to manage to swing at Tevesh or bounce Tevesh or remove Tevesh elsewise, because no one is mainlining Planeswalker removal, trust me, it's not a thing. The worst thing that can happen is it gets bounced, which is really not that bad because it's still just 5 CMC to cast, and you've likely gotten your value out of it anyways. If Tevesh ultimates, this is a new list. I've ultimated Tevesh twice. I won both of those games. If you turn 1 Tevesh and you're able to go 3 turns plus 2ing him, and you ultimate, you put the game in your pocket. Now the thing is, Tevesh, while yes, the Thrall are nice, you need blockers in certain instances. There are some games where you're just going to spam +2. Tevesh is predominantly here alongside Rograkh for the draw. Again, Rograkh for 0, draw 3. Rograkh for 2, draw 3. Rograkh for 4, draw 3. I just see 9 cards over the course of 3 turns, and I've likely advanced my board state in an absurd way, in a way that likely you haven't. Seeing that many cards is so crucial. So the pairing of these two is what makes this list so strong. And again, I was tooting my flute off the bat, but again, it's not me. The deck plays itself. You just want to play a lot of ramp, a lot of fast mana, put Tevesh down, recast Rograkh, pull in the solutions you need. And because of our divergent line of play, that's instant speed, I highly encourage you, because you are in Rakdos, even if you're accelerating at absurd speeds, if you're not the only proactive list at the table, do not push for the win first. Unless you can do it on turn 1 and you're on the play, you can add Nas on turn 1, whatever. Do that. But if you have the win on turn 2 and you're playing against another list that's trying to attempt the same thing, let them try first. Be patient with this list. Understand the play lines as I've laid them out. If you know what you're going for, it's very easy to navigate and operate for a win in this deck, particularly again with Divergent Transformation. If I just wait to attempt to win on my turn, or rather off turn, I could instant speed, remove your Tymna, remove my Rograkh. And again, it really doesn't matter what they wheel into. Unless it's a hate bear that really screws up your strategy, like a opposition would be, right? For Rograkh at least, then you might be screwed, right? And or they go into a hull breacher and you're not able to peer into the abyss anymore. That sucks. But again, ad nauseum in those instances is usually the best route to go. If you're doing Divergent Transformation off turn, be patient, wait for the right moment, bide your time. Fill up your hand with resources from Tevesh. Give yourselves as many opportunities to succeed than pushing for a win where you might fail. Patience is key here. Now, the last thing I want to discuss before I close out this video is a card that I didn't highlight initially, but is something that is very important for the list. Like any black list that cares about using their life as a resource, Necropotence on the screen now. Triple black, enchantment, skip your draw step. That's okay, I'm drawing cards. Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. This only functions when you discard a card, fortunately. Pay 1 life. Exile the top card of your library face down, put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step. Now, in case you're wondering how the end phase works, there is that end step followed by the cleanup step, right? I forget that that's the exact wording, but the end phase is consistent of 2 steps. At the first half of that step, you are able to, if you have priority, which you'll receive after the fact, after all of these at the beginning of your end step triggers go on the stack and resolve, you receive priority. With Necropotence, you can push a win much like you would in a Shimmer or Shimmer Zur list, right? Remember that? We did a deck tech on Shimmer Zur a while ago. But essentially, during your end step, if you have Emergence Zone out, and I should probably clarify what that is. You might not have played it, but it's a card from War of the Sparks. Emergence Zone, Necropotence. If you have Emergence Zone, think about Necropotence. If you have Emergence Zone, think about winning whenever. For 1, it taps for 1 generic, but for 1 generic, tap it, sacrifice Emergence Zone. You may cast spells this turn as though they had flash. So, much like you would a Shimmer, which lets you cast artifacts at instant speed, you can use Emergence Zone with Necropotence to win on your end step. Doing the same lines of play I've illustrated already. So, bear Necropotence in mind for this list. Elsewise, it's generally there for value, but if you happen to turn 1 a Necropotence, make your Demonic Tutor Emergence Zone. It's hard to stop a land from hitting the battlefield, and if someone tries to remove your Necropotence at this point, I'll Necro -30. And I'll move to my end step. Yeah, you can, Nature's Claim or whatever you did to my Necropotence, that's fine. I have all the cards at my end step, and I have Emergence Zone now. So remember that Necropotence, in much the same way Adnaz is, and much the same way Peer into the Abyss is, it's a huge draw engine. All this list is meant to do is put half of your deck in your hand and then dump it down and win the game. You don't need blue for that. You don't need white for that. You don't need green for that. Rakdos has the best ritual ramp, the best tutors, by way of, at least if you're doing Underworld Breach. And Tomb and Gamble, same thing. They're perfect for this line of play. You have everything you need in these 2 colors to succeed. Flux Reservoir, it's not a relic of the past. It's still just as good as Stormwind as before. And maybe it's 4 CMC, but you're making a shit ton of mana anyways. It's not difficult to accomplish the task with a 4 generic, win con. And if you don't like that, just steal someone else's Oracle, If you want to still play blue in your list, well, you've got it there. But guys, that's it for Rograkh and Tevesh. I hope I gave you all the little dirty deets to make this list operate the way it should. Again, if you have any questions regarding the list, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. But as I do with all of my videos, I'm going to close this out by ending with a thank you to all of my Patreon members. Thank you so much for helping to support the channel. You guys are what makes all of this possible. I really appreciate your support here over on the 99. And as I do with every video, there's a special random shout out to one lucky Patreon member. And this week's Patreon member is Ali Barali. Ali is one of our long-standing Brew Baby members. Thank you so much for joining the Brew Baby crew. You are among the best. And for his thoughts on the monthly topic, I'll be reading for Andrew Blank. I gotta say white. Given that the color pie goalpost generally seem to shift away from it to favor the other colors, contributing to white's identity crisis and facilitating the lapse that red, blue, green, and black run around it in every power level, my main concern with white is R&D's continued adherence to white's confined design spaces, typically weenie, aggro, life gain, and stacks. In and of itself, those characteristics are fine, so long as the other colors don't break their roles, or that the colors all shift together in roughly commensurate measure. Yet, white hasn't been designed to keep pace, and other colors are starting to cut into white's specialties. We just got a Staxy Sultai commander in Commander Legends with Arkellos, for example. This was white's premium competitive space, now afforded to a blue, green, and black legendary. A color trio that doesn't need any more help. So for me, it's not just that white can't seem to break the color pie like the other colors, but that the other colors are occupying more and more functional space, including within functions that have been traditionally white. I just want to state that nearly every response to the monthly topic of January has been white, outside of the one colorless statement, which I totally agree with as well. But white does need a lot of help, and I doubt it will be fixed by the end of 2021, and that's sort of a shame, but what can you do? At any rate, guys, I hope you enjoyed this deck tech. Look forward to seeing this on many future Brew Wars, but the next one in particular, I'm very excited to showcase it for you all there. Again, my name is Patrick Marlette, and happy brewing, babies!